Thanks for joining us, everyone. My name's Chaz Summers. I'm a TA liaison here at Foundations Incorporated. Welcome to our Beyond the Conference webinar series. Today, we have Brittany Stanton from Foundations, and we'll be getting started shortly. But before we do, I just wanted to give you a little background information about Foundations. So we're a national education nonprofit located in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. And our mission is to improve the quality of education by building the skills of educators. And so to do that, we work across the school day with after-school programs, school districts, mm, states to create a brighter future for every child every single day. If you're interested in learning more about Foundations, you can follow us on social media, and I'll drop our socials in the chat as well. Um, you may already know us from our signature professional learning experience, Beyond School Hours Conference, which is held each year in February. In 2025, we'll be in sunny Orlando, Florida, from February 13th to February 16th, and we'd love to have you all as our guests. Registration is still open, so feel free to jump in and have fun with us in the sun. So today, I'd like to introduce our facilitator, Brittany. Brittany, do you want to say a little about yourself?
Thank you so much, Chaz. Yeah, so what good leaders do is the subject of the day. And this does live a little close to my heart because I was a program director. Prior to my time in the out of school time space, I was a music teacher in K-12 settings. And so I spent 7 years teaching before moving to the out of school time space, where I took on a leadership role, a director of education for the program that I worked in. And then over time within that organization took on more leadership responsibilities. And so a lot of the stuff that we'll be talking about today is things that like I've lived it, I'm sure y'all have lived it, and that we as leaders really need to be reflective in our practices, and so we can best serve our staff, our students, the programs as a whole. So thank you so much for joining us today as we talk about this, and I hope that we're able to just share something new that you can take back to your own programs. If you have any questions or anything, please feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A box. We do have a question here about with this recording of the webinar. So all of the Beyond the Conference webinars are housed on the Foundation's website. This is being recorded and will be available on the website. I normally would say like give us 7 to 10 days, but as Chaz mentioned, the conference for 2025 is next week. So it might take us a little bit longer to get it up on the website because of that. But maybe we'll be seeing you in person in Florida. So thank you for your question. And again, if you have any other questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat or the Q&A box. Without further ado, let's jump into it. So as we mentioned, we're talking about what do good leaders do. And so really, we're going to be covering 12 low cost or no cost things, techniques that you can implement to engage both students and staff. And some of these you might already be doing, others you may not, but we hope that you'll find something that you can take away from today's session. And so we'll spend time discussing impact on engagement for those different stakeholder groups, and then explore 12 different techniques for increasing engagement. So what exactly is engagement? Before we go too far down this rabbit hole and start thinking about what this is, you are likely attending this webinar today because you have experienced low engagement in your program, whether that's happening presently or you're worried about it coming down the pike, or maybe you are already working on overcoming some of those challenges. So let's think about it. What do you see? What do you hear? Or what does it feel like? that you helps you know your students or your staff are disengaged? What are those things that you're seeing that and hearing and feeling that are telling you that perhaps engagement is not what it should be? Drop us a note in the chat about some of the things that you're seeing in your programs that you're concerned about. Um, I'll just share a little story here. The program that I worked in had youth workers, and that was through a workforce development program in the region. And sometimes, well, they were teenagers, let's face it. Sometimes they would struggle to be engaged as a worker in the program. And so really it boiled down to needing to take the time to do some training for them, right? And what I mean by that is it started with the conversation and talking to them about what it actually means to be engaged, especially whenever you have youth working with younger youth. What does that look like? And so telling them and explaining to them that this means that you are close enough to reach out and touch the students, that you are close enough to engage with them, right? And that the second piece of that is either what you're doing, you're doing what the adult in the room, the adult leader, has told them to do. You're leading an activity, or you're doing the activity with the students. And so for these teenagers who are working in the program, this helped start to clearly define what engagement looked like and what those expectations of engagement were for them, and how it sounded and what it would feel like in the program as a result of their engagement. So here we have a few folks. Thank you so much for chiming in. Another program employing youth in their program. And it can be really hard to get them to engage with kids. They just don't, you have to, it's like a teachable thing. You have to show them what you expect, and then hold accountability for them doing the work, right? And so we have another comment here: seeing attention-seeking behaviors. Yep, we see a lot of that. Hearing name calling and harsh words, and feels like it's a never-ending battle, and my heart goes out to you. Some days it does feel like it's just something you're never going to win. But maybe some of the things we'll talk about today, you can take it back and try. I would just say that even if you leave at the end of the day feeling like it wasn't a win, try to find that moment of sunshine that happened with that day, right? That one kid that maybe made you smile, or the work that you're doing has a positive impact, even in the smallest amount. But we have to be intentional to focus on those positives sometimes, especially if we are in the midst of the battle. You got to look for the good. So thank you for sharing those things. And let's talk a little bit more about, well, what does engagement actually look like? So we're going to use this definition for today. Engagement is when people are involved in responsible, interactive actions to contribute, teach, and learn from one another. So this is how we're framing engagement for today. And similar to the story of the youth working in youth programs, right? We're needing to set those expectations. What are their responsibilities? How are they interacting and contributing to the program? And ultimately, we're learning from each other in this, right? So here we go. Why do we reach this point, though, that staff and students are disengaged? There's several reasons for this. And the things that I'll say are not necessarily the whole list, right? The list could be significantly longer, but here are just a few starting points to think about. Lack of purpose or meaning. So this is when people might feel that they are disconnected from the purpose of the work. And that's true whether it's employees working in the program or the work that students need to accomplish in the program. And so this is just another reason that that leaves people sometimes feeling like it's meaningless or unimportant, and thus they disengage. We also see that a loss of trust has great impact on engagement. So another reason that that they might be feeling this loss of trust, right, is whenever they might not believe in the program, or they might not experience the support that they need from leaders like you. And so they're left feeling alone. And then as a result, they disengage. Um, and then finally, we have that lack of connection. And so folks will disengage when they don't feel connected to the program or the classroom or the group. And this sometimes, especially in the workplace, can seem like a last minute thought, unimportant, if you will. But truly, it is the key to staying engaged instead of just checking off tasks on a list, right? Um, I've said recently in other conversations around that culture is key, and building connections with people is it should be in the job description. And it might not be, but thinking about the culture that you're building and in the programs and how people are connecting with one another, students to students, students to staff, staff to staff. And so think about which one of these might be the contributing factor to what you're seeing as disengagement in your programs. Is it that lack of purpose, a loss of trust, or a lack of connection? Or is it something else? Be thinking about what is that root of the disengagement. So now we talk a little bit about what engagement is and how that kind of presents and what the contributing factors are. But how do we rework towards a higher engagement, right? How do we move forward? So we're going to begin to look at some of these techniques. There are 12 of them, and our time today is quick. So we will be going through these pretty intensely. And as we begin, it is important that we recognize that these techniques are not one-time solutions. You might need to try one or two and then move on to another. You might need to spend significant time trying out one of these techniques. And also, these 12 techniques are not the end all be all. They're just a starting point for you. So thinking about how we're going to do this over time, that ultimately we're going to try to counteract those impacts on disengagement. So thinking about how we rebuild trust, meaning, and connection for our staff and for our students. So number one, we're going to drop a handout in the chat for you that coincides with many of these techniques. You can use that at your leisure, and I'll mention it throughout today's presentation. But number one is drawing on skills. So we all learn all the time. And whether that is from friends, families, or others in our lives, right? We learn in formal settings like school, work, etc. But there's also those natural learning moments throughout life, things that you experience within your surroundings and with others. And so this type of learning is largely incidental. Sometimes students learn things along the way that we wish that they didn't. So have you ever had, I know I have, a student come in and they're using a word, maybe not such a great word to be using. They heard it somewhere and they didn't know what it meant. They're just saying it. This is a natural learning moment, right? We can use this more natural moment to approach learning for good things too and redirect them, right? So each staff member has something to teach the youth in your program, and each student has something of value to offer to the program. So these can include knowledge and skills. That encompasses interests, hobbies, languages, culture, community knowledge, you name it. Everybody has something that they can bring to the table. Life experiences, work experiences, those skills that you develop in those settings. If you work in that OST space, which I know you do, sometimes people come from a field that has a really diverse background, right? Not everybody comes to OST with OST experience. And so this can occur during the school day as well. And so for youth, you can use those interests. You can use volunteer experiences or community activities as points of engagement for them. We also want to think about resources. Individual connections in the community can be a resource that programs use to target growth and development, both for students and for staff. And then we have personal style. So this includes the way that you are, what you like to do, and the things that you want to learn. And it's the same thing for your staff, right? The things that they want to do, the things that they want to learn, and ultimately things that help youth learn. Engaging these things can help increase overall engagement and connection that people feel within your program or school. So as you're thinking about this, what unique skills do you bring to your organization? Here's a moment for some self-reflection. Drop it in the chat box. What is the skill that you bring to the organization? Are you very organized? Are you really good at time management? Are you really creative and come up with great activity ideas? What is the thing that you can say is like at the top of your skills list? And so this tool that we've shared with you, it is an inventory that staff can use to share what they bring to your program and can be used in planning activities and lessons. So it can help, again, work through this kind of thinking about what are those skills. And thank you for those who are sharing it in the chat. We have folks who are creative, open, flexible, organized, and approachable. Approachability is so important. We want our students and we want our staff to know that they can come to us if they need something. Strong observation skills, extremely flexible and adaptable, which we know you have to be an OST because anything can happen. So that was number one. Thank you for dropping those things in the chat. Like I said, we're moving fast today. We're moving to number two, which is listen. So we need to pay attention to what students and staff are saying to us. We can get busy with the work that we have to do, our own tasks that we are very responsible for, right? But we also need to make time and make room to listen to what those around us are saying. That's one of our responsibilities. And so once they start talking, we really need to be intentional with paying close attention to what is being said, both with what they're saying in words and also thinking about body language or emotions that they're showing. So one way that we can increase our listening is by asking open-ended questions. Now, that doesn't sound right. I'm going to listen by asking questions. Yes, you're going to listen, and when they're done sharing, ask an open-ended question so that you can get more information and hopefully be able to then address whatever the concern or the need, fill in the blank is. And so an open-ended question might be something like, can you tell me more about that? Why is it that you feel that way? What happened before? There's so many things, depending on what the situation is, that you could ask as an open-ended question. But it's really about making that time and paying attention to all of the things happening in that conversation. Another great thing that you can do as part of active listening is to paraphrase back to them what you heard. So keep that in mind as you listen to the things that people are telling you, both students and staff. So we want to hear from you. Let's take a look at a few challenges that you might face, particularly when with a group that can be barriers to sharing. So we have a few scenarios we're going to show you in the chat box. Want you to share out some ideas about how you might address these various problems. So here we go. Scenario number one: participants don't contribute or are hesitant to contribute to a discussion. You know, when there's crickets in the room. I grew up watching Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you know, and you wait and you wait and you wait, and it's like Bueller and nobody's there, right? What do you do in that moment? Well, we certainly don't want to put people on the spot and force participation, because that could be really detrimental to engagement, because it shows everybody else that, hey, I might get singled out. Not so great. But what you can do is suggest or provide opportunities for talking in pairs or threes or other combinations of small groups, like a pair and share, turn around to your neighbor, and talk with them for X number of minutes. And then you can maybe come back together to share some of those thoughts. So the next scenario, again, if you have any ideas, drop them in the chat how you would address these things. Let's say in this context that they are making vague statements. This is a great moment to ask for clarification, to ask for an example, or have them try to illustrate the points that they're trying to make. Those open-ended questions and rephrasing from our last tip on listening can also be applied here. Now, let's say that the conversation is going, but as it's happening, participants are getting tense and maybe there's some arguing going on. Ugh, what do we do? Well, if you have any ideas, we'd love to hear from you. I know for me, it's really important that we are acknowledging the feelings that are happening. And let's face it, there can be some strong feelings in the room. So take time to make sure you're hearing people out. Use those open-ended questions and rephrasing, and then try to reframe each person's perspective to make sure that they feel heard, because that's the most important thing, right? That they are heard. And I love this recommendation that just came in the chat about taking a breath. Chaz and I were just talking earlier today that, sometimes we as adults don't even know when we need to like tap out and take a moment. It's such a really important skill to take a breath and allow space for big feelings to happen. And we talk about that with, our little kids in our programs. It's relevant for all ages. So keep that in mind. Take a breath. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, so conversations moving and grooving, and well, this one person just is starting to dominate the conversation. What in the world are we going to do? Well, there's, I'm sure, a lot of wonderful ideas that you guys are thinking about, but one thing that you might consider is making space to acknowledge the person's contributions, but then opening an invitation for others to respond, right? This can be really hard, especially if this is also coming off of a place where there are strong feelings in the room, right? You want to acknowledge the contributions to the conversations, but you also want to create that environment where everybody has the opportunity to share whatever is on their mind and have those responses. So thinking about these things and how we might approach it using listening and drawing on skills to help us do that. Now we're on to number 3 for the day. This is really important because here we've had listening and we've had this conversation. The buck does not stop there. You have to follow up. And so we know that when we have to follow up on that input that you've received, part of that conversation or feedback surveys or fill in the blank, and that's regardless of whether it's coming from staff or students. And so we like to think about following up, we like to call it the 3 R's. Reaction, relevance, and responsibility, right? Keeping these 3 R's in mind to help make sure that we are following up and following up well. So reaction, meaning that you are listening, but then you are also asking yourself, what is your reaction? The relevancy, so thinking about how you consider this relevant to your work. And then the responsibility, thinking about how will I use this in my work? So those are the 3 R's. This helps us to let go of our own emotions and to identify actions based on the feedback that we've received, and then follow up through in order to improve the overall organization or program activity, fill in the blank. So we must include in our responsibilities as a leader, the responsibility of following up. It might not be officially in the job description, but it is something that we need to do. We can't say that we will do it or, we'll hear feedback and then not do anything about it. We can't push out surveys seeking input and feedback and then not utilize the data that we've collected to inform things moving forward. If we don't follow up, this leads to that breakdown in trust and connection, which are contributing factors to disengagement. So following up is very important. Number 4, very similar to following up, but it requires its own kind of lane because, well, how many times have you got asked to do something and, well, we just get busy, right? The laundry list of things to do gets long. It's important to do what we say we will do, even if it's little. So this includes coming to look at a student's picture if they're like, hey, can you come see my artwork? Or bringing a staff member supplies for their activity whenever they're like, hey, I don't have a moment to do this. I need some supplies. Can you get them to me? So this is little things, this is big things. And ultimately, it all supports the building of trust and improving relationships. So think about, do you say, I'll be right back, but then never actually make it back? Or we can do that tomorrow. And then it doesn't happen for another week. Yeah, it happens to the best of us. And we are human. That is fine. But we have the responsibility as leaders to be able to follow up and keep our promises, or better yet, if you can't, then say so. And so that's when we say that yes is yes and no is no. If you've promised something, keep that promise. If you can have the foresight to know whether you can deliver upon that promise or not before you make it, keep that in mind and maybe just say no. And it might be that you have to revisit it at a later time if the answer is no now. And that is also okay. So how about you? Where are you on keeping your promises? Your annotation tool, or you can drop it in the chat. Annotation tool is if you go to the top of the screen, there should be a little drop down for you to be able to find annotation and just drop a star or a heart or a check mark or what have you on one of these, hopefully one of these categories, about whether you're keeping up on your promises. Take a moment to reflect on that. How often do you keep your promises? Big ones, little ones, in between ones. Is it rarely? You get busy, you forget? Is it sometimes because things get hectic? Is it mostly because once in a while you lose track? We all do that. It happens to the best of us. Or are you like a pro at keeping promises? Thanks for dropping things in the chat. I see a lot of folks being like, I'm mostly there. Great for you guys. You are in the right place. That's where you want to be because, like I said, we are human. We strive for always, but we know that there's going to be a human element here. And we also have somebody saying that they try to focus somewhere between mostly and always. And I think that's a really good place to be, right? Because we want to strive to do the best that we can possibly do. But that human component, sometimes we can't always fulfill that. Follow through goes a long way. Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that in the chat. Do not make promises that you can't guarantee. Thank you for dropping that in the chat. Absolutely. Sometimes that answer is no, and that's okay. Oh, wow. We're halfway through with communicate well. This is technique number 5. So think about these things as you build out communication. And I mean that in every sense of the word, whether that is email, newsletter, verbal communication, phone calls, text messages, fill in the blank. So who is the audience and what are the platforms? Be sure that your communication reaches and is accessible to everyone. This means that you might need to use multiple platforms and you might already be doing that. Understandability. So is your message presented in language that everybody can understand? And I don't just mean like I'm speaking English right now and I've got Spanish speaking families. Is my document available in Spanish? I don't just mean that. I also mean things like technical jargon, right? Is the language that we're using, the verbiage that we're using appropriate for the audience of that communication? Be sure that, especially with our adults, right, that if there is jargon that we are going to be using, that they become familiar, explain what the terms mean, and making sure that we don't then talk over our students' heads with advanced vocabulary if they are not, like, if it's not appropriate for their age group, right? Timeliness. So this is important. We want to consider the timeline for communicating your message. What else is happening at or around that time? Don't be sending a gajillion emails to all of your families on the same day. You need to map out these communications, because if there is too much, then they're going to tune out. And the same thing happens with your staff too. So thinking about, are you telling your staff that you need to, say, cut spending on materials at the same time that you are thinking about making a big purchase? That's a little counterproductive. If I hear that as a staff member, I might be confused. Like, why are we thinking about buying this, replacing the basketball court whenever I don't have pencils? That's a problem. So thinking about the communication timeliness, and also, is it early enough so that people can plan accordingly for whatever it is? That brings us to transparency. So you got to share it all, right? Don't hide from your staff challenges around funding. Don't hide from your programs the challenges that you might be having with staffing issues. Don't hide from students things like the staff turnover maybe that you experienced, or changes to plans. You want to share openly with an appropriate level of detail based on that stakeholder group, right? To help staff and students trust you and understand the actions that you're taking. This can be a tough one, because you have to determine what's the right amount of transparency based on that stakeholder group. The biggest thing that I just want you to understand about this key part of communication is that it's honesty. It's rooted in honesty. And then thinking about, no matter what form of communication you are using, what other messages are you sending along with that? So let's say I'm having a conversation with somebody. Am I appearing nervous or stressed? Like, what is my body language saying in addition to the words that I'm saying? Is my email communication, is my newsletter completely disorganized and it's not, coherent to the person who is receiving it? What else is that saying about the message you're trying to send? So really paying attention to those things can be key. Communication comes with planning. And so we have this wonderful quote here from Peter Drucker. Communication is in the mind of the recipient. You're just making noise if the other person does not understand you. I think that's a great quote. So whenever we have, moving on from communication, we have our next technique here, number 6, which is providing those meaningful opportunities to both students and staff. They want to make connections with real life experiences and to make a difference. We know that for our staff, who are primarily adults, unless you have youth workers in your program, that they learn best by relevant and things that they can put into action immediately. So it's relevant to their work and it's actionable. We know that students need those hands-on experiences and real life connections so that it has meaning to the work that they're doing. They understand in the larger scope, right? So we often think about this with students, and it can be very easy to think about it as like project-based learning, service learning, maker spaces, civic learning, any of those kinds of opportunities, right? Because there is a purpose and an intention behind them, and it's providing them with some kind of real world application. This is important for staff too. So think about those opportunities that you can make an impact on students just by supporting your staff. To see students make progress and to feel like they are giving their time and energy to something that is valuable, that makes a difference in society. The same is true for your staff, right? If If your staff just feel like they're babysitting, then they're probably not having that meaningful connection within the program. And then your students aren't having the meaningful connection within your program, which is a contributing factor to disengagement. So be thinking about how we're providing meaningful opportunities, not just to our students, but also to our staff. So we've made it halfway through the tips for today. We've got 6 more to go. Let's check in. Here are the ones we've talked about so far. Using your annotation tool or dropping in the chat, think about which techniques you might use to address the scenario that you see here, and go ahead and mark which of the techniques you might use to address it. So your staff are putting on movies at least once a week. Ooh, they say they don't know what else to do. Ooh, also not great. You don't want students watching so many movies. You know, we've all had those days. I when I was a classroom teacher, there were days when chaos ensued, and sometimes the only thing that we could do was just put on a movie. But that's not great. That's not great for the students. It's not connecting to their learning. If you're going to do this, you have to be intentional, right? You have to be intentional and build it into the lesson plan. You can't just throw on whatever you want. You have to bring it back, make it connect. So we have some suggestions and ideas here of which technique that folks might use to address this. So we have keeping promises and communicating well. I think this is a great opportunity to communicate those expectations and understand what the needs are as to why it's gotten to this point where they're showing movies once a week, every week. Maybe there isn't enough activity planning. Maybe they've worked through all the things and they just don't have anything else to do. Well, the suggestion here, somebody says provide meaningful opportunities. And this is that perfect moment, right? To be looking at how can I have my staff work together to build up a better plan for the activities that students will be participating in, and how can I support them in that work. We also have a suggestion that we're providing meaningful opportunities by communicating well, giving ideas, and we'll do a lesson if necessary. So sometimes this sounds like, I do, you do, I I do, we do, you do. Where that is you do that with your staff too, right? We do with our students, we do with our staff. And so to thank you to this person in chat sharing that you do the lesson if necessary. Sometimes you got to show them what you want. That's part of communication too, right? So thank you for chiming in on those. Okay, here we go. Number 7. We're working our way through the second half of our techniques for today. So often we as leaders get into the weeds managing that we forget to then celebrate and acknowledge our students and staff for the impact that they're making to our programs and our organizations. It is really important that we make space and time to recognize proudly and loudly. So celebrate those achievements, acknowledge contributions, and recognize growth. We used to do shout outs in the program where both students and staff had the opportunity to acknowledge each other for whatever it was that happened in their day, their week, etc. And there was a school too that we saw a program running at the school where there was a mascot. It was an eagle, and they had this really clever like board on the wall where staff could write down post-its to each other about things that they saw them doing that were soaring like an eagle. Very clever. I also, when I was in the classroom, there was a period of time where there was once a week where every student was given a Post-it note, and they had to think about something that somebody did for them in that week and write them a little thank you. And then they went and put that on their lockers. That was so cute. Okay, so we have some things in the chat here. I try to make time at the beginning of each monthly staff meeting to talk about celebrations. I used to do the same thing too. We called it kudo time. And we would open the meetings with kudos. I love that. And it looks like there's a couple other folks that do something very similar. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so we're recognizing proudly and loudly. And we are also being a resource. So for our students and staff to learn and grow, they need resources, and not just the books and the pencils and the paper and all that. They need you. You as a leader are a resource. And so that means being present. We can be guilty of going to work in our office or at our desk instead of being available as a resource. This means that we're closed off from staff and students. And so if they have questions, how are they going to come to us if we're closed off, right? We need to be available and present so that we can answer questions that student and staff have. And our presence allows us to make sure that both physical resources, those supplies, as well as ideas that people have, whether that's staff or students, and other resources are readily available. We had a few more folks chiming in the chat. Thank you so much. Weekly meeting with staff. Yes, being intentional around your meeting schedule is really important. We have group chats, and I shout out to those who shine. Oh, I love that. I love it because it makes the others step up. Now, that's an interesting result. I love that. You know, I've seen it with students for sure, right? You know, if you are praising the things that you the positive things that you're seeing from your students, and the other students are seeing you praise them, then they in turn will start to do the things that will get them similar praises. Funny how it also works with adults. So you are a resource, but what resources do they need? So what resources do you get asked for most frequently? Think about that question and drop an answer in the chat for us. What questions do your students or your staff ask for most frequently? What resources do they need? What is it that they are asking for? I found, well, first of all, kudos to all the program leaders out there, right? The laundry list of things to do is never ending, it seems, at times. And it can be really hard to walk away at the end of the day feeling like you've accomplished things whenever there's a million and one other things that are priorities and things that are competing for your attention. And so for me, when I was running programs, I had time prior to the students' arrival where I got office work done and the things that I needed to do. But as soon as students started arriving, I was intentional about being in their space for at least a half hour as they were arriving so that I could say hello and I could get to meet them and I could be that resource if they needed to do. I was present. And during those moments, the things that the students asked me for the most was more time. They, can I come up to your office with you next? Can I come sit in your office and do my homework? And yeah, sometimes they just want you to be around. And how sweet, especially whenever, you know, maybe they had a hard day. The same thing can be true for your staff. We have some folks sharing in the chat here. I love this. Thank you so much. I think that just support in general, brainstorming and talking things through. Yeah, your staff need thought partners. I recently found myself just listening to them about their personal struggles. They just want to know that someone cares, staff and children. Amen. Yeah, sometimes it can be real, especially when we're thinking about staff, it can be really hard to come to your supervisor and to share personal matters that might be impacting your work. But you, as the leader, as the supervisor, can create the safe space where they are comfortable to bring those things to you and not feel like they're going to be judged or that their employment might be impacted. And so being that resource can sometimes just be the listening ear. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. It's usually supplies that staff ask for, and I tried to give them suggestions around themes or subject areas. And we know, supplies can be a really easy fix to be able to provide, unless there's, if it's a large budget item, perhaps that's a little bit more challenging to acquire. But that brings us back to the keeping the promises, right? If they come in and they ask for some supplies, making sure that they get those supplies. Thank you for sharing those things. Okay, we got a few more things to techniques, and we're going to go super fast because we are counting down the minutes here, folks. So serve. Be a servant leader. If you're not familiar with servant leadership, I recommend checking out Robert Greenleaf. Servant leadership is a model for leadership. It means that we are supporting the staff and the students in our care by asking things like, how can I help? And help meeting whatever those needs are. Servant leaders explain why they say what they do. They clarify why it is true. And they also ask, what do you think? Giving students and staff that opportunity to think for themselves and share their own ideas. Number 10, you may have heard this old proverb, but there is some truth in it. There needs to be opportunities for social interaction in the workplace and in your programs. It can help support that intrinsic motivation and reduce stress. And so for this reason, it's important not to skip team building or celebrations. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be a potluck instead of a catered meal. For our students, this is important too. Thinking about how we can support building positive relationships with peers and with adults. This is done informally through moments where students are arriving or being dismissed, whenever they're having a snack or a meal, and having that opportunity where students and the adults in the program can engage with each other. We all need those opportunities for celebrations in order to build community and ultimately engagement. We're going to jump to number 11 here and focus on community care. So we know we should and probably want students and staff to practice more self-care, which has been a buzzword the past couple years. But there are things that we, the leaders of our programs, can do to create a community of care. We can help support the people around us by doing these three things. Boundaries. Work during working hours and expect the same from your staff. It can be really tempting to open up your email and respond to emails outside of working hours because there's stuff that you just have to get done, but try to resist doing it outside of working hours. This boundary setting is something that I found to be extremely important as I took on more leadership responsibilities, because I was that person where I'd get home from work and I'd pop back on the laptop and I'd be answering emails and doing things. But it really was detrimental to my well-being. And so I started setting boundaries. You got to set boundaries for yourselves. And by doing so for yourself, that's also communicating to your staff that you value their work time versus non-work time, and that you respect that difference, right? Time. So give your students and staff time when they need it. This is really important because you never know, somebody's going to come to your door with that problem that they need to share, right? Unless it is an emergency situation that you cannot be interrupted, make the time to have that moment with the staff and students when they need it. So this might be like a staff member who needs to step out of the classroom for 5 minutes because of something that is occurring and they just need that breather that we talked about a little while ago, and being able to just step in for them for those 5 minutes. That can be really helpful in providing that time that they might need. And then we think about cooperation. So creating a culture in which you support each other by working together. When you give to staff, engagement increases. They will in turn cooperate in completing the tasks that are assigned to them and do it happily. And this makes everyone's job easier. Number 12, this is our last technique of the day, but it's not the last technique in the world. We plan for our students to learn and our programs and schools to improve their overall performance. But sometimes we fail to provide staff the opportunity to develop their skills, particularly their own leadership skills. So leadership development goes beyond teaching instructional skills. Evidence shows that leadership development increases staff engagement because individuals better understand the organizational design, the quality, the impact, and the indicators for success. This can support organizational growth and help rise up future program leaders. One of the things that we hear so frequently here at Foundations from programs that we talk to is staff turnover. There are things that we can do to ensure that our staff feel skilled to stay. A large contributing factor to staff turnover is not feeling a positive culture in the workplace and not having opportunities for growth and advancement. This is number 12. Offering those opportunities where your staff can develop skills that they need to be more successful and more impactful in their work. And those are positive impacts on staff retention. We can also develop student leadership, right? We don't want to just think about this for staff. We also want to think about it with our students. So supporting their growth of 21st century skills through student leadership committees or other programs that you might have, providing those leadership opportunities for students, even at a young age, can be really transformative for them. And so leaders are more likely to see themselves as integral and necessary, even in whatever their limited role might be, whenever we are supporting and offering leadership development opportunities. So we checked in on the first 6. Let's check in on the last 6 that we talked about here today. Use your annotation tool or drop it in the chat. Think about what technique you might use to address the scenario you see on your screen. Your staff are grumpy. They grumble about their daily work and are doing the bare minimum. Whew. That's a hard one. And I also feel like it comes in seasons too, right? If there has been a long period of time and folks are ready for winter break or summer break or whatever it may be, right? It can be really hard to make it to the finish line whenever this is the mood in the room. Thank you for those chiming in with some ideas. We have being a servant leader and being a resource from 2 folks. Thank you so much for sharing that and agreeing with each other. Servant leadership is absolutely key here because we need to understand what are those contributing factors that are making them grumpy. What is it that they don't have that they are only able to do the bare minimum, whether that is a hard and fast supply or if it is a skill that needs to be developed, right? So being that resource to your staff to identify why are they feeling this way and what are the contributing factors to the bare minimum and how can you increase the engagement by offering things like leadership development or a community of care, building that community of care. Maybe folks just aren't talking to each other and aren't talking to you. And so when there's no communication and no sharing, how can you possibly know how to address things? So creating a place and a space where folks can share and you can get information as to why is this happening? That is being a resource. That is serving. Sometimes you just got to get social and have a moment where folks can unwind and be able to connect with one another and through a comfortable setting such as that, you might be able to engage in some conversations around this issue that doesn't feel like you're going to staff and saying, well, there's this issue and we have to address it. That is true, but it's all about the approach, right? And creating that space and place where staff feel comfortable talking about whatever it is that's contributing to these things. All right, so if you like these 12 techniques, there are, if you go to our social media pages on Facebook and LinkedIn, there is a mini series based on all of these techniques that you can check out. And we'll also be providing links to the resources and the mini series when we follow up with the posting on our website. But before we kind of wrap up our time today, I want you to think about what are one or two things, or 12, that you might do to increase student or staff engagement. As we've kind of talked through these 12 techniques today, what are you looking to implement in your programs to address the disengagement issues that you might be experiencing? So drop that in the chat. Let us know what you're thinking about, what you're hoping to implement in your programs to affect change. When we think about disengagement, it's really about prevention of disengagement. You might be experiencing it right now, but thinking about the things that we can do to build that positive program culture, to be a better listener, to create more opportunities, so that as you move forward, not only are you addressing the current disengagement that you are experiencing, but you are setting yourself up for success for the next season, whether that's summer camp or whether that's fall recruitment, um, to be able to address engagement from the get-go. Because if you do all these things and you have a positive program culture, and students are coming in and your staff are coming in and they're engaged from the beginning, then there's a less likely chance that disengagement will occur. So if you're looking to address staff acquisition or retain engaged staff, there's lots of things that we've talked about. We hope you'll try some of these techniques. We've got some folks chiming in here. More one-on-one with students and staff. Love it. Maybe a social event for staff or a team building idea. A team building and idea sharing. Love that. Set work boundaries and communication well. If you are struggling yourself, setting boundaries is the first thing I would do. I definitely need to set some boundaries. We have some from somebody. Absolutely. Food. Look, I did not eat lunch until I put it on my calendar when I was a program leader. I had to put it on my calendar, otherwise I didn't eat. And I mean, that's just bad news bears. Everybody's grumpy when they're hungry. And we have here somebody looking to providing the resources and serving. Absolutely. These are all great. Thank you so much for sharing with us where you're thinking of jumping in these 12 techniques. I'm going to hand things back over to Chaz to send us out for the day. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'd like to just take a moment to thank Brittany for being here with us, and thank you all for coming. Please take a moment to complete the survey that I'm dropping in the chat right here. We value your feedback because, our aim is to meet your needs, right? To provide you those additional learning opportunities so you guys can grow, you can help your programs and your staff grow. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn and our other socials that we've dropped in the chat. And again, we have our Beyond School Hours conference coming up. So we would love to see all of you there in sunny Orlando, Florida. I do want to let you know that a certificate of attendance will be sent to you within a week for all of those that have attended. So, you'll be able to make sure that you prove that you were here and you got these incredible resources from Brittany. So I'd like to once again thank Brittany and encourage you guys to fill in the feedback form that's dropped in the chat here. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that.
Thank you again, everyone. As Chaz mentioned, that feedback form, please fill that out. We really, it's more than just value your feedback. It informs the webinars and things that we develop over the course of the year. And so please take a moment and chime in there. We really do appreciate it. This survey, like I said, is what informs the content that we develop. This webinar and their past four beyond the conference webinars were all built because of feedback that we received from people in the field address that saying I need help with these things. What's out there? What can we do? And so we really do mean it whenever we say that we take your feedback and we use it. And we hope that as somebody says that we're going to be seeing them down at BSH next week. I can't wait. Please come find us and say hi. And if
Yeah.
you are if you're registered, the app, you can go and you can check out the workshops are live and go and find the workshops that Foundations is giving at the conference and come say hi to us in some of our sessions. We love meeting people in the field. And you know, we don't really get to see you whenever we're on the webinars. So come say hi.
That's right. It's always fun to touch base and share resources in person. So you guys 30 more seconds to fill out that feedback form. And once
Oh,
again,
and
thank
for
you all
that
so much for joining us. I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to mention, Chaz mentioned the certificate. Fill out the survey so that you get the certificate.
And with that, that ends our webinar for today. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you for the next one. Have a great day, everyone.